In this video, I'll be going over taking the mean and using some basic functions in Google Sheets. In Google Sheets, we're going to obtain the mean of a sample by using the average function in Google Sheets. And along the way, we're going to learn how to use some basic functions and the behavior of copying and pasting these functions in Google Sheets. So let's go to Google Sheets. We're going to open up our undergrad characteristics data set. And actually, we're going to go back. I want to show you more in a more simplified data set how to use functions. So we're going to go to this mini data set where we just have two variables. We have student, which is just an ID variable that I'm highlighting here, and we have age, and these are age of preschool children. Obviously, maybe we'll change this one. Well, we'll just say age of children, not preschool. So you can edit the title of a Google Sheet by just clicking on the title up top, just FYI. So just age of children. Those are the two variables. Made a little error there. And to use a function allows us to perform a statistical operation or mathematical operation more broadly to an array or a column or a array of data that we're working with. So to start the function operation, what we can do is a couple of things. We can click on here we can click on functions, and we can see we're given a list of basic functions like sum, average, count, max, min. So we can click on this button for even more functions, and this gives us a documentation list of all those different functions. So if we wanted to take the average, we could click on this little sum sign, and then we could click average, and then where we last clicked in the spreadsheet, it's going to say equals average, and it's going to have some parentheses, and then it's going to have a space. In that space, while this is up, we're going to right click and scroll down to select all the cells that we want to compute the average of, and then we're going to click enter, and we get an average of 4.23. And just to remember, just to reinforce the point, oftentimes for the data sets, I'm going to ask you to round, and a very simple way to round to the hundredth, and if we looked at this as 4.235294118 would be rounded to the hundredth of, and that round would be 4.24 since this 5 here rounds up. So we round up to 4.24, but instead of doing that kind of a little bit of computation in our head, we can just click on decrease decimal places all the way to the hundredth, and we get 4.24. So we've successfully, so the average age of children in this data set is 4.24. Yeah, that's how we can click an average. To reiterate, an average is just the sum of all these numbers divided by the total number of observations. So if we created we added all these different data, and then we got that sum and divided it by, I think, 17, we'd get 4.24. So that's the average, or otherwise known as the mean. That's how you can work with it with a small data set. Another way, and you can make the average, you can place these functions wherever you want. Another way to call functions in a little more advanced way is just to click on a cell, hit equals, and you'll see that this little dialog box will pop up, and you can type average, start typing. And as soon as I start typing the first two letters of average, I can see a number of different options come up. Now we just want the average. We don't want any of these other types of averages. We're just going to take the average. We get the first end of the parentheses. We're going to start clicking the array. Array is just a kind of way that we can classify multiple data observations. If you hear me say the word array, we're going to capture that array of data. And then we can either hit parentheses, we can close the parentheses, or in this case, just hit enter. Then we round, we get the same exact, whoops, what happened there? I made it go away for some reason. And we can round it to 4.24. Now, if I go and copy this, we'll see this, and I move it to here, I get this value. Because now if we double click on this, we can see if we double click on a function, it tells us what that array is, and that's highlighted by the orange, B2 to B18, B2 right here to B18, and it's highlighted. Now if because I copied and pasted it, now it's thinking it's trying to take the average of all these blank cells, and that's why it's giving us this error. So copying and pasting functions is where that function is located in the spreadsheet is relative to where the data is located. So if you move where the function is located, the relative position of the data also changes. And this has advantages, as we'll see. This may not make a whole lot of sense why this is doing this right now, but you'll see the advantages of this if we want to take multiple averages of multiple columns. All right, so we're going to delete this. So we have 4.24 here. If we wanted just to copy this value, I can say Control Copy, or go here to Copy, and then I can right click here and click Paste Special, and I can say just the values only. And now that doesn't copy the entire formula, but it just copies that value. Now if I copy this, and let's say I opened up Microsoft Word, just a blank document that I'm writing in, and I paste it, it'll just give me that value. It won't copy the syntax for that function. So that's a very basic function. We'll be using other functions as we get going, those being the standard deviation, variance will be two popular ones, also square root. So being familiar with how to call these functions, equal sign, and then typing, let's say, sum. We can say sum of all those numbers. Now it just guessed, you can see in this case, those numbers, and I can hit enter, it gives me a sum of 72. So that's the sum of all the ages, and as I mentioned earlier, we know that there's 17 observations. So if we write another, we can also do mathematical expressions within cells. So if I take this equal sign, and I click on this cell, it says B22, which corresponds to B22 cell, and I divide it by the number of observations that there are, I get the mathematical average, or the mean. So that's another way you can do it. So there's a variety of ways, and we can perform, as I mentioned earlier, by hitting the equal sign, 3 plus 4, we can do basic math within these cells. There's an order of operations that sometimes you need to abide by. So 3 plus 4 times 3 is equal to 21. If we didn't have those parentheses there, the order of operations changes and we get 15. So you need to pay attention if you're doing mathematical operations within cells. And we're not going to be doing a lot of that within this course, but just knowing you have that functionality available to you, it's very convenient when you're working through different statistical problems to know that that's available to you. But we won't be doing a ton of that, but knowing that that's available to you is important. So let's go back to the undergrad characteristics data set. I'm going to left click on the Sheets home page. We're going to open up this data set. Now, we've obviously got bigger data set here. We've got 60 observations. And remember, if we click on one of these cells and we try to edit it like this, it gives us this warning. And we actually don't, as in the previous, I don't want to be computing averages down here with this data set. You can do that, but then if you go and try to do the statistics add-on package, let's say if I did average here, and I click all these cells above it, so just like above, hit enter. One, it's going to give me this warning. I'll click OK. Now I get an average extroversion of 56.47. Great. That's rounded to the 100th. I might need to answer that on a question, but now if I go in and do the add-on statistics package, it's going to calculate this row 62 as an actual observation, or think it's a different person and not an average. So we don't want to actually do that. So what is a good alternative for doing that? Well, what we can do is create a new sheet. So we're going to add a sheet, and we're going to say, we're going to call this sheet, we're going to rename it, and we'll say averages. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our data. We're going to left click, hold, drag. let's just do all the, we're just going to calculate the average of the 5 different big 5 personality factors. We'll hit Control C, that's going to hit copy. There'll be a dash line around the cells that we're going to copy. Go to averages. We're going to place this here. Control V for paste, or you can always go here, paste here. I always use these shortcuts. If you're not familiar with those, I would get familiar with those. It kind of saves a little bit of time of taking your hands off the keyboard. And we're just going to type mean here. Okay, so we want to calculate the mean for these 5 variables. So what we're going to do here is we're going to hit equals, and that's going to cue the function, and we're going to start typing average. We'll left click on the average function. Now it gives us this blank box like before. Now don't touch anything in this screen. We're going to go left click data, and we're going to left click, hold, drag, pull all the way up. Make sure we select to observation number 1, so we have, and then we still see this average. It says data exclamation point. That is calling the data sheet, and it's calling cells B2 to B61. That's the array of the data. We're going to click enter, and we get an average of 56. Look at, now previously I think we got 56.71 because we had rounded to the 100th. This looks like it's rounded to the whole integer, so we're going to just double check to make sure that actually it's 56.47. We can always double check by double left clicking on this, and we get the formula here, data B2 to B61, and we can look over here, B2 to B61 looks like all the observations in the data set. Go back to averages. Now the behavior of, I mentioned earlier when we were working with the children's age kind of mini data set, if I copied the function and pasted it here, it moved the cells relative to where the function moved. So now instead of saying, because I moved this 1 to the right, the data set has moved 1 column to the right, C2 to C61 instead of B2 to B61. Now, so we get the average of agreeableness, because this covers all the agreeableness observations. And you can copy and paste by using right-clicking and copying, or Control C. Another great way is just grabbing the bottom right-hand corner, dragging it to the right, copies this function all the way over to all of these cells. Now, so that gives you the average for all these different variables. A very fast way to calculate averages or means for different variables. We can highlight all these variables if we wanted to remove digits to the right of the decimal point, or add digits to the right of the decimal point. We can kind of mess around that way. If we drag down now, it drags the average. So it changes both of the 3. It changes the array that's calling from 3 to 62. And we can see that the numbers slightly change because now the data set is getting offset by 1 downward, which means that it's trying to add these cells and removing these other cells above it from the average computation. So that actually average is wrong. But how would you handle this if you did want to drag down for some reason and you didn't want it to move relative? Well, one thing you can do is click on you can click on this the part of the function that corresponds to the array, and on your keyboard there's a key. If you're working on a Windows and a Mac, you sometimes have to hit a function if you're working on a laptop called F4. If you click on F4, what you see is now there's $signs from B next to B2 and B61. These $signs indicate that these cells are now anchored in place. So now if I drag downward, or I drag to the right, if I'm copying to the right, or if I just copy and paste, it's all 56.47 because these cells are now anchored in place. And so it will not move relative to how you change the cells. You can cycle through the different anchor options by hitting F4. You can anchor everything in place, you can anchor just the row in place, or you can anchor the column in place. And that's expressed by where the dollar signs are at. If they're on the numbers and the letters, everything is anchored. If they're on just the numbers, then the rows are anchored. If it's on the letters, then the columns are anchored. So we're going to remove all the anchors and we're going to pull this back to the right, or we're going to copy. Let's just do Control C and then Control V to copy and paste and to get our averages. So in this video, we've gone over the basic function of how to calculate the mean of a sample by using the average function in Google Sheets. We've also learned how to some basic functions and the behavior of copying and pasting these functions in Google Sheets. This last part is really a power user kind of pro tip for if you're doing a lot of statistical functions within Google Sheets. It can be very effective and fast to just drag functions in relationship to the data set instead of having to rewrite and click through all the options for each function for each cell. So I encourage you to play around with this, make up your own data sets, play around with copies of the undergrad quiz data set, undergrad characteristics data set, and just see how these functions work, especially with this average function. You can also use the sum function as well.